In the chaotic aftermath of the dropsite massacre at Isfahan 5, the Cabal, ever watchful, ever manipulative, sought to employ the Alpha Legion as their instrument to ensure Horus's decisive triumph would occur, and their preferred plan for humanity played out. And this occurred as the shattered remnants of the XXth Legion, battered and demoralized, retreated to their homeworld of deliverance. Unbeknownst to them, the Alpha Legion had already infiltrated their ranks, surgically altered their operatives, and meticulously disguised themselves as fallen Raven Guard from Isfahan 5. All the while, they quietly observed and gathered intelligence, their presence undetectable even when under the direct, watchful eye of Primarch Corvus Corax. However, not all would be to the Cabal's designs. As true to their nature, the Alpha Legion decided to wield the blade themselves and carve a third path for humanity. Not a true victory for the Imperium or for Horus, one that would perpetuate the existence of humanity as long as possible. The Alpha Legion's patience here was methodical. They waited until Corax functionally was able to reconstitute his legion by using samples of pure Primarch pre-creation DNA strains provided personally by the God Emperor, and only once the Raven Guard achieved the critical breakthrough to build up their forces to significant numbers, the legionaries struck, tainting the genetic stock and transforming the new aspirants into usable yet grotesque malformed abominations, allowing the Raven Guard to have the forces to continue to some degree within the Horus Heresy, but not to significant enough numbers to completely upset the balance they sought to create. Concurrently, rebellions were fomented amongst the tech guilds of Kedivar, the Forge World orbiting Deliverance. Here the Alpha Legion forces camouflaged themselves as Raven Guard and staged surgical strikes intended to destabilize the planet entirely, further limiting the Raven Guard's operational abilities without completely taking them out of the game, since the loyalist Raven Guard, through what to the Imperium is said to be determination and heroism, suppressed the uprisings in a record-breaking amount of time and eliminating the infiltrators post-haste. However, Alpharius would ensure that critical data on the corrupted gene stock and any remnants of the original gene designs remained squarely in the hands of the XXth Legion, leaving the chief apothecary of the Emperor's children, Fabius Bile, with only mere fragments that were so damaged that he could not use to further his experimentation. Whether Alpharius sought to elevate his legion above all others, or merely to preserve tools for future operations, remains a matter of mostly speculation. Soon after this, Omegon met with the Cabal's representative, Aetherurur, aboard his flagship. After a terse exchange, he declared that the Alpha Legion would act independently, forging the path they believed was best, free from external oversight and out of the control of the Cabal. This was a decision consistent with their long-standing tradition of almost absolute autonomy. Here, the Alpha Legion would also seize an additional objective, the Emperor's gift of pure Primarch pre-differentiation gene stock, which Fabius Bile was led to believe was completely destroyed, as were the Cabal, misleading both the traitors and the external group that sought to control them, while safeguarding the true samples for their own designs. And though a demonic virus had been applied to compromise the gene stock that they had secured for themselves, the Alpha Legion had reportedly only created it with the explicit caveat of them having the secret ability to remove it, or so the tech adepts of the Dark Mechanicus assured them before they were slaughtered, in order to preserve the secret. Whether this is true or not remains a mystery. Their secondary aim was to destroy the Raven Guard's gene seed, but somehow that mysteriously failed, in a manner that wouldn't completely take out the loyalist Astartes, but would keep them in the fight at a significantly decreased capacity. In 006 M31, the Alpha Legion would take part in the first battle of Paramore, on the world of Paramore 5, which was positioned in the northern edge of Segmentum Solar. This became a key target in the early days of the Horus Heresy, serving as both a staging point and a vital supply terminus for Imperial expeditionary fleets, meant that Paramar lay almost directly between Isfahan and Terra. Before the blood that had been spilled on Isfahan 5 had even cooled, the Alpha Legion, under the guise of careful subterfuge, orchestrated a massive assault. They were followed by a second armada of primarily Dark Mechanicum forces and the Legio Ferrenus Titans. The fiercest engagement of this battle occurred on Landing Zone Secundus, within the Paramore Nexus. Here, 8 to 10 maniples of Tiger Eyes Traitor Titans strode into the deserted spaceport. Anticipating minimal resistance, Unfortunately, they encountered Titans of the Legio Griffianicus, Loyalist Mechanicum troopers, and Loyalist Iron Warriors from the 77th Grand Battalion. Despite this unexpected opposition, the Alpha Legion's initial strike would prove to be devastating. With overwhelming firepower and the calculated application of numerically superior forces allowed the traitors to seize the Paramar Nexus, leaving the world under Horus's control with minimal disruption to military stockpiles. The next event of galactic scale that would in some way involve the Alpha Legion would be the Culling of the Wolves, circa 007 M31. Following the fall of Prospero, the depleted Space Wolves had found themselves ensnared by the Alpha Legion in a protracted naval engagement within the Alexis Nebula. Superior in number and fresher in forces, the 20th Legion's forces forced the Wolves deeper and deeper still into a maze of corrosive fogs and treacherous stellar corridors. Every maneuver of the 6th Legion had been anticipated. Even the sacrificing of lighter vessels was employed to secure opportunities to strike heavier targets. Finally, as the Space Wolves were cornered and their annihilation seemed imminent, reinforcements arrived in the form of the Dark Angels. The Ramlius-class Starfort Chimera inflicted grievous wounds upon the Alpha Legion's flagship, forcing a reluctant retreat. Though Leman Russ survived, the encounter had humbled the 6th Legion in a manner previously unimagined. The myth of the Space Wolves' nigh invincibility, already tarnished, was further shattered in the coils of the Great Hydra. Then would come the blockade at Chondak. Following the turbulence of Isfan V, Alfarius turned his gaze to the Chondak system, intent on preventing the White Scars from joining the Loyalist forces in the wider galaxy. The 5th Legion would remain blissfully ignorant to the grand scale of the conflict until Omegon initiated a strike against Tenebrae 950. A strategically significant asteroid facility used as an Alpha Legion garrison. Here the 20th Legion employed a pylon array to jam communications, ensuring that the White Scars stayed in the dark regarding Horus's rebellion. Leading a one-way near self-termination strike, Sheed Ranko, commander of the Alpha Legion team, sent to obliterate the facility, and they succeeded. Some historians argue that the Legion may have manufactured claims of the site leaking intelligence as a pretext for allowing the White Scars to finally learn of the Horus Heresy and to join in the fighting, creating the stability they required following the destruction of the space. After this, surprisingly enough, the warp turbulence in the sector momentarily subsided, permitting for communication from Terra to reach the White Scars. In particular, orders of recalls from Rogel Dorn, the Praetorian of Terra, would finally reach the Scars. As the White Scars prepared to depart, they encountered the Alpha Legion flotilla, lingering in the system's edge, silent, inscrutable, and unmoving. The 20th vessels maintained a cordon, quietly amassing reinforcements across nearby space. All communications from the White Scars were met with utter silence, and orders from the Khan himself restrained escalation. The 5th Legion was instructed to maintain the fleet's integrity and to prevent Alpha Legion forces from infiltrating their rank. Yet when the White Scars executed a sudden precision strike, an arrow formation which sliced through the void, the 20th Legion never deployed heavier ships in order to pin them down. Despite appearances, the cordon was never meant to kill or do any realistic harm, but rather to test and perhaps mislead or dissuade the White Scars from joining in the brouhaha at this time, and thus, without heavy bombardment, the White Scars slipped free, leaving a trail of flaming Alpha Legion wreckage in its wake. The Battle of the Chondak system proper, occurring in 007 M31, encompassed worlds such as Ephrikion, Terras, Hondril, Latrex, and Primus Bor, and became the center of the White Scars' primary campaigns following the triumph of Ulnor. Chondak's Prime, known amongst the Khan's warriors as White World for its salt-like terrain, was the stage of the final remnants of Orc warlord Uruk, whose forces had been hunted down by the White Scars for 6 long years. It was in this area that they were intentionally delayed by the Alpha Legion, as it seems the entire campaign was a long-term misdirection. The next event of galactic note would be the capture of Amnesiacs. The Amnesiacs was a super heavy arc freighter from the Heliodyne shipyards, and it carried battle group Astramax of Legio Penetrea to Terra. This was a prize of immense strategic value. The Alpha Legion saw this opportunity and activated 50 legionaries under the strike commander Dartan Virax, aided by a network of Spragoi agents masquerading as empty suits of newly forged power armor, and the legionaries themselves would awake mid-transit after the Amnesiac was rerouted to Calstrai Mundi in order to crush a rebellion. Through a series of precise and brutal operations, the Alpha Legion infiltrated the ship proper, sabotaging its communications and eliminating the astropathic choir, creating chaos amongst the Mechanicum defenders. Even heavily armored Castellax automata fell to the Legion's Banestrike ammunition, while deliberate incineration of crew quarters, scrambled sensors, and tactical coordination allowed them to maintain combat superiority. Even the ship's Magos Dominus was assassinated in short order after the attack proper began. When resistance persisted, Virax enacted a contingency. A warmonger-class Abyssus Edax Titan would open fire from the cargo hold, eradicating the Mechanicum forces in one devastating strike, securing total control of the Amnesiacs, including the cryogenically preserved Titan and their princeps on board. During the Horus Heresy, the Alpha Legion proved itself capable of operations, rivaling their loyalist counterparts. One of the incidents that best showed this off occurred at Talran, when they delivered a string of defeat to the White Scars, also at Yarant, where they humiliated the Space Wolves, and across a dozen outposts. They struck efficiently in a manner that even the Raven Guard would be hard-pressed to deny was anything but perfect. During this epoch of the Horus Heresy, the 20th Legion proper would remain a rather nebulous force, one which, when acting as one, no one truly knew if they were fighting a full legion or only a handful of operatives, or even whose side they were on, as traitor forces for some reason kept disappearing throughout this epoch, and it seems loyalists kept sporadically getting the upper hand on them, despite conditions making it nigh impossible. In the wake of Chondax, Alpharius had ordered the remainder of his strike fleet to strike at the 6th Legion, the Space Wolves, as they regrouped in the Alexis Nebula. Leman Russ, weary and battered from the fall of Prospero, a campaign that left the Thousand Sons homeworld in ashes following their defiance of the Emperor's decree absolute, sought refuge to lick their wounds with their tails between their legs. The 20th Legion, under the twin primarchs Alpharius and Omegon, launched a calculated move, motivated equally by strategy as personal vendettas, as Leman Russ had long criticized the Alpha Legion for their reliance on deception and subterfuge rather than brute forcing conflicts through direct combat, a grudge Alpharius was eager to exploit. Their objective was rather simple: delay the Space Wolves and preventing them from arriving at Terra too soon, keeping them from bolstering the Imperial defenses more than necessary. Russ issued a distress call to the nearby White Scars, imploring Jagatai Khan to intervene. Yet the Kagan, unsure which of the primarchs was truly his ally, and whom were the real traitors? Honestly, a fair question at the time, especially with how masterful the Alpha Legion had been through the entirety of the heresy up to this point, refused to commit until astropathic signals could be decoded from Terra. For a time, they sat and watched the ongoing brouhaha. Demoralized, and rightfully so, Leman Russ temporarily withdrew from command, leaving First Captain Gunnar Gunherald to lead in his absence. But when the Alpha Legion pressed their attack, the Wolf King returned to the bridge of his flagship Harfkurl, rallying his legion behind him. During the battle, Cataphracti Terminators of the Alpha Legion's elite Learn and cohort teleported aboard the flagship, and Russ reportedly engaged in close combat with one who appeared to be Alpharius, which, seeing as almost a quarter of the loyalist primarchs believed themselves to have fought Alpharius, it makes this incident rather dubious. Just as the defeat seemed inevitable for the Space Wolves, this was when the Dark Angels arrived and saved the day. Now, the Alpha Legion was also involved in the incidents involving the Shattered Legion, in particular involving the ship known as the Sisyphum, and their involvement is primarily known thanks to the accounts of Raven Guard specialist Nyokan Sharokin, who recounts at least one primarch presumably Alfarius, operated from a hidden facility on Lorena 212, while masquerading as an Iron Hands war leader known as Shadrach Medusan, using the Sisyphum's crew to hunt down loyalist elements. Supposedly, and this is a big question, there are some who believed that the Sisyphum was used to hunt down loyalist elements within the 20th Legion. Alfarius' deception remaining hidden until the surviving forces escaped, finally realizing that Medusan was an Alpha Legion operative. However, we do not know if this operative was actually Alfarius or just everyone thinking they fought Alfarius throughout the entirety of the heresy. This was a successful move by the Alpha Legion since it eliminated a lot of the rebellious elements of their legion while keeping the Sisyphum's crew busy. Up next would be the Solar War and the Imperial Palace infiltration, which occurred at the height of the chaos of the Imperial Civil War, when the Alpha Legion, having maintained networks capable of moving personnel and material across sectors, decided to use their influence to move things from Segmentum Solar to the Sol system, in particular, getting around the defenses made by the Imperial Fists and Rogel Dorn. This would be a feat of pure legend, as the areas they were crossing had been meticulously fortified, as each orbital and planetary layer had been transformed into a defensive bastion to completely counter Horus's eventual assault. Yet the 20th Legion, in a bid at least partly to prove their superiority, sought more than just tactical victory. They aimed to humiliate the Imperial Fist by directly infiltrating the Imperial Palace itself. The Alpha Legion's operatives, who had been trained to operate under multiple, rather unique mission parameters, were sent out. These parameters often could vary rather distinctly. One operative might be tasked with protecting an individual, activating countless scores of loyalist Alpha Legionnaires kept in stasis beneath the Imperial Palace, while another individual might be sent out to kill a single person, potentially even a custodian. All of these activations would be done through singular commands, transmitted via Vox or scrolled on parchment, which would instantly shift an operative either to being loyalists or being a traitor upon activation. However, after activation, that activation command could no longer be re-implemented. This methodology allowed dormant Alpha Legion assets to be hidden in Terra decades before the Horus Heresy had ever started, and for them to succeed where others had failed, as several operatives had already penetrated the Investiary, a hall which housed the statues commemorating the primarchs, while others were deep beneath the Imperial Palace, even unknown to the custodians of the God Emperor himself. This area, containing the statues of all the primarchs, only had two areas that were completely empty, those of the two lost primarchs. And rather than a tactical victory, the Alpha Legion had chosen this moment to target the statues of all aside from Alfarius and Rogel Dorn, or potentially Omegon and Rogel Dorn. We can't really be sure. This was a calculated insult, delivered silently, even bypassing the Regent of Terra, Malcador the Sigillite. Now the question on how exactly he discovered this breach and this destruction is unknown, but he is the only one who noticed anything and spoke up. Shortly thereafter, an Alpha Legion fleet under Warmaster Kel Solenus struck the Sol System's outer defenses, capturing several moons of Pluto in a singular devastating strike, taking the outermost Imperial bastion for the Alpha Legion. The true extent of these operations remains a closely guarded secret, known only to Rogel Dorn and his elite Huskarls, though due to the Alpha Legion's love of misdirection, it's equally likely that the records that remain are actually edited lies or outright falsehoods. In the year 008 M31, a previously unrecorded Black Shields faction calling themselves the Dark Brotherhood carved out a rogue Corsair empire along the edges of the Pale Stars. Their long-running conflict with the Alpha Legion's Hunter-Killer detachment shows that the Legion operated on multiple fronts, not only attacking the Imperium itself, but also those who had betrayed the Imperium and attempted to create their own small kingdom. The Legion's tactics in this combat situation combined infiltration, sabotage, and psychological warfare, although these engagements were seen by the greater Imperium and Chaos itself as a choreographed misdirection, rather than the Alpha Legion actually dedicating large forces to this conflict. At the same time, an Alpha Legion strike group conducted a series of raids on the outskirts of the Liestos system in the Segmentum Pacificus, inflicting heavy casualties upon colony habitats of the system's 3 agri worlds. Those survivors, if that's truly what they were, returned home infected with a previously unknown agri-pathogen. Within a year, this biological agent obliterated the system's entire macro output saturation field, transforming them into poisonous sludge. The resulting famine claimed nearly 90 billion lives in a single swoop, necessitating almost no active combat from the Alpha Legion. Then there's the Battle of Pluto, which occurred as Horus's march on Terra loomed ever larger. At this time, the Alpha Legion was tasked with the sabotage and the crippling of the Sol system as a whole, from deep within. Despite the heavily fortified outer defenses held by the Imperial Fist, as stated above, an individual who we believe is Alfarius personally commanded the Alpha Legion's flagship, initiating a nearly year-long drift towards the Sol system with almost the entirety of its fleet in stasis, minimizing the heat signatures in order to avoid detection. Sleeper cells planted years before the Horus Heresy ever even began, simultaneously activated across the Sol system, sowing chaos and diverting the defender's attention, or so we are led to believe. Acts of murder, sabotage, arson on multiple planets simultaneously ensured that Rogaldorn and his forces were preoccupied with cries for aid far from Pluto, diverting the bulk of his forces. At this time, the true target of the XXth Legion was in fact Pluto. Upon arrival, Alfarius' fleet, numbering over 200 vessels strong, assaulted Pluto and its moons, Charon, Erebus, Nyx, Styx, and Hydra. Ironically enough, their true objective was Hydra, a fortress moon housing critical astropathic monitoring stations. Loyalist forces here were under the command of First Captain Sigismund, and they numbered in only 30 ships, yet they were able to hold the line valiantly. Fireships hidden amongst the Alpha Legion's fleet wreaked havoc upon the defenders, while Kerberos bombarded its neighboring moons with nearly unmatched firepower. Despite the overwhelming odds, the Imperial Fist held out until reinforcements could come from the Phalanx and a fleet of Imperial Fists along with Armada Imperialis warships. At the climax of the battle, Rogaldorn personally led an assault on Hydra, confronting who we are led to believe was Alfarius in direct melee combat. Dorn would strike down Alfarius, forcing the XXth Legion to withdraw. Yet, as it is ever so often the case with the Alpha Legion and all the primarchs who have killed an Alpha Legion primarch, there are doubts whether they indeed killed a primarch, or even in the case that Alfarius was truly slain, that Omegon potentially took his place, or that Omegon was the one who was slain, and Alfarius was the one who took Alfarius' place as Alfarius. This is due to the identity of the twin primarchs being twins having been unknown to either Horus or the Imperials. It is even posited that to this day, Chaos itself does not know the truth of the twin primarchs. And while history records the death of Alfarius, the fate of the XXth Legion remains truly unknown, in large part due to subterfuge. To go into further detail on the final battle between Alfarius and Rogaldorn, or at least who we believe is Alfarius, which occurred during the Battle of Pluto, we see that Rogaldorn's elite Huskarls fought valiantly, and it was Archimedes, master of the Huskarls, who first deduced the Alpha Legion's true objective, or at least what we are led to believe was their true objective: the sabotage of the Imperial astropathic network centered on Hydra, leading a contingent on a daring assault upon Alfarius' personal forces. Archimedes would be cut down, mortally wounded, as the battle began to tip towards the traitor's favor. Then, when it could only be described as the most perfect of timing, the mobile fortress known as the Phalanx, carrying aboard it the Primarch Rogaldorn, arrived with a massive contingent of Imperial Fists alongside their fleet, utilizing the Sol System's gravity wells like a cosmic slingshot in a manner all too reminiscent of Tau technology. Dorn's reinforcements arrived with an efficiency that was almost impossible to predict, and with devastating firepower, they pacified and captured the guns on Kerberos, enabling a direct assault on Hydra's astropathic chamber. Dorn and his remaining Huskarls teleported directly into the chamber and confronted Alfarius and his elite Terminator Guard. Archimedes, barely alive, watched helplessly as the duel unfolded. Dorn cut, Storm's teeth blurred. Alfarius swayed back, pivoting, sliding a hair's breadth past the screaming edge. Archimedes lunged to his lord's side, his sax blade reaching for the spear thrust even as it unfolded. His left hand was locked around the spear's heft. For an instant, the two primarchs were an arm's reach apart, eye to eye. Brother, Alpharius began, and Dorn hacked Storm's teeth through Alpharius' arms above the wrist. Blood and sparks fell in the flash of gunfire. The world became a slow, sliding tableau of movement. Dorn's face, cold stone, marked with blood and strobing shadows as he pulled the spear from his shoulder. Alpharius, staggering, lashed out with a kick. Another cut, scrying from left to right. Storm's teeth ripping armor like parchment. Red gloss, sheen on indigo blue, and a demigod felling. His torso an open cave of meat and bone. The only sound was the growl of Storm's teeth and the clang as Alpharius struck the deck and began to rise, strength defying the red ruin of his body. Dorn, still spear in one hand. But victory, Alpharius gasped. Dorn rammed the spear through his brother's chest. The tip punched through the power plant on the back of Alpharius' armor. Alpharius' mouth opened, his eyes wide. A great wash of blood poured from between his teeth. Dorn held him on the spear. The two, so close it seemed almost an embrace. The air around them was burning like a heat haze as the blood struck the floor. A high wail rising with a coil of wind, which circled the pair. Alpharius' mouth moved, forming words as Dorn was still for a second, his eyes blank and black in the canvas of his stone face. Then he pushed Alpharius away. Snakes of light whirled through the air. The primarch of the Alpha Legion staggered, mouth still moving. Rogel Dorn brought Storm's teeth around. The blade cut down through Alpharius' skull, then tore free in a spray of blood and a detonation of light. The last planet of the solar system turned in silence. Explosions finished, and ships' guttural glows, and ships glittered like snow falling through winter night. Lives ended. They ended in small spaces, with the air sucked away. In the roar of gunfire pouring through passages, in the spinning blackness that were the last sights given to them, was the blink of explosions and the light of stars. And they ended in the heart of a moon, with the blood of a being who had been more than human, but less than a god, pooling on a floor of cold iron. Rogel, the Praetorian of Terra, looked down at the corpse of his brother. Around him, the world turned. Groups of warriors appeared in fresh flashes of teleportation light. They spread through the vault as the doors crashed open, and Kratos ran in and saw the sight none would believe. A moment that should have stopped the galaxy in its access. A primarch dead at the hands of a brother. Within sight of the world of their creation. But the soul system turned without pause, unknowing or uncaring. With their primarch slain, the Alpha Legion's fleet withdrew. At the moment of Alpharius' death, Omegon sensed the law, and with a chilling calm assumed his brother's identity, permanently, unbeknownst to Horus or the Imperium. From this point forward, any and all actions attributed to the Alpha Legion flowed through the singular mind of Omegon, or Alpharius. Once again, we can't truly be sure who was who at any point. For the remainder of the Horus Heresy, the XXth Legion fractured its operations, withdrawing from the main forces of Terra rather than rejoining at the climactic siege, besides a detachment that was sent in order to activate some supposedly loyalist elements of the Alpha Legion stored beneath the Palace of Terra. And despite an agent being sent to awaken them, said agent failed by being slain, so they remain to this day. In the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, during the Great Scouring, the Alpha Legion would be confronted by the Ultramarines on Escador. Here, Raboot Guilliman faced off against Alpharius, or Omegon, masquerading as Alpharius, or even an Alpha Legion legionnaire, masquerading as Omegon, masquerading as Alpharius. Following one of the primarch's deaths on Pluto, the Ultramarines would be dragged into a conflict, with the Alpha Legion's own primarch being used as bait to lead them into perfect positions to strike. First to arrive on the planet, Alpharius was able to choose his battleground, for he knew the Ultramarines would not rest until they had hunted down all the traitors. The Alpha Legion deployed deep within the harsh mountain ranges, at the very pole of the planet, riven with gillis, ravines, and high passes that would seriously hamper movement, especially for ground vehicles. Alpharius was convinced that the battle would be won by the side which overcame these problems best. Through forward planning, coordinated air transports, and detachments coping independently of heavy support was how he intended the conflict to be won. Guilliman was a military commander with few peers. However, a fatal flaw was that all the experiences, lessons, and tactics he had accumulated over centuries had been carefully documented, compiled, and made accessible to the other legions, in the primarch's almost biological desire to improve the Emperor's armies as a whole. Now this gave Alfarius the advantage because he knew how the Ultramarines would operate. Indeed, Guilliman's initial deployment followed exactly the doctrines set down by his own writings to the letter, and the Alpha Legion moved to trap them. But Guilliman chose the first nightfall to do something unexpected. Breaking his own rules of operation, he led a large portion of his forces deep into the mount, deploying by Thunderhawk, drop pod, and teleporters into the midst of the Alpha Legions with no known lines of support, supply, or reinforcement. Guilliman had targeted the high command of the enemy by directly deciding to assault none other than Alfarius. And while direct records of the combat between the two primarchs are scant, if any, what we do have is the records from a singular Ultramarine who had logged what he had seen, and it goes as follows. As we closed upon the traitors, Alfarius himself led a counterattack, charging headlong down the rocky slope with his bodyguard slamming into our line. Not even Ultramarines could stand before a primarch, and his power sword felled every noble space marine within reach. Our advance was halted, and I was forced to recite the Canticle of Faith to steady my squad. But then an imposing figure appeared, and my heart was gladdened. Our Lord, Primarch Reboot Guilliman himself strode forward, ignoring the melee around him, straight towards Alfarius. The two primarchs stood in equal stature, both clad in shining power armor, and each wielding a glittering power sword. But where one was noble, the other was craven. Where one was loyal, the other was a betrayer. All other combat ceased as we watched them. There was a long pause, neither primarch moving an inch. Then both struck in an instant. Each sword made a single stroke. Then both were still again. For a second, the two great men stood facing, before Alfarius slumped to the ground. Alfarius, having collapsed immediately, led the Ultramarines to be emboldened by what they believe to this day to have been their primarch's victory, leading them to unleash a relentless attack, wiping out every visible Alpha Legionary in the area. But victory proved fleeting, for over the next solar week the remnants of the Alpha Legion, having been hidden in very specific locations and allied with the natives of the world, harassed and cut down Guilliman's forces significantly from every direction. Ultimately, the Ultramarines were forced to retreat, having their hand shown and accepting that they had been tactically defeated, necessitating the bombardment of the planet from orbit. Despite Guilliman's protestations about the Legion's dishonorable tactics, history leaves little room to dispute the fact that even without Alfarius, at least to our knowledge, the Alpha Legion's shadowy adaptive strategies have allowed them to continue to outmaneuver the Imperium's most disciplined forces to this day. By the end of the heresy and the death of their final primarch, the Alpha Legion, or perhaps what remains of it, demonstrated that victory in war does not always belong to the largest army, nor even the mightiest primarch. Sometimes it belongs to the ones who can quietly pin down the enemy, whose true intentions are as layered and as undecipherable as their existence. And if you're keeping track, supposedly there hasn't been, to any real degree, a coherent or seemingly coherent Alpha Legion from the points of view of both the Imperium proper and the forces of Abaddon the Despoiler. However, this might be another ruse, as a stalemate that would perpetuate humanity, which seems to have been the goal of the Alpha Legion, has continued for the last 10,000 years.